Supply agreements. People who are selling businesses, business gurus, people who educate people on buying businesses, they'll all tell you that supply agreements are a great thing. If you find a business with good, solid supply agreements, you should buy it. Well, that's actually not true. And this is the story of Alex. She had a business with a supply agreement, and that very supply agreement cost her over $1 million in this loss of the sale of her business. That's right, we were about to sell the business for over $1 million and the sale failed because of the supply agreement. Sounds silly, doesn't it? I mean, how can a supply agreement cost you the sale of the business? Well, it depends on the supply agreement, clearly, and it also depends on what your definition of a supply agreement is. Now, there are more than one type of supply agreement. There's a contract to supply, there's a supply agreement, and there's variations in between. There's supply agreements with sellers, there's supply agreements with buyers. So that company may have a supply agreement with a customer of theirs, and that'll allow them to sell X amount of product over a period of time. It gives them access rights, all those sort of things. And they may have a supply agreement with a supplier. Now that supplier will be the person who makes it, or owns the rights to the product, and that allows that company to sell that product on their behalf. And those are the kind of supply agreements we're talking about today, and those are the kind of supply agreements that most buyers deem to be most valuable. So this is the story of Alex. Now, Alex was a very, very smart cookie. She left school, she decided she wanted to go into the beauty industry, so she worked for beauticians, she worked for hairdressing salons, and she trained herself up as a beautician. She was very good at her job. And she decided that there was a gap in the market for good quality accessories within the beauty and hairdressing industry. So not the actual product being used, but the accessories around that product being used. And things like, well, I'm not a beautician or a hairdresser, but things like the blow dryers, the scissors, and all the accoutrements and all the little bits of equipment around that industry that were being used. She had tables, she had all sorts of things that sold within the beauty industry. And as I said, she was a very smart cookie, so she decided there was a golden opportunity in this country for that sort of product. So that's what she was going to do. So with a good few years of experience, I think she had 5 years, in the industry, she decided that she'd go overseas, go to some trade fairs, she'd find some product, and she'd set up a distribution business in the country here and sell that product. So she went to Europe, she went to the trade fairs, she contacted a number of companies. Most of them said no because she had no experience, but one company took a chance on her. So she negotiated a supply agreement. That supply agreement gave her exclusive rights to the product in New Zealand. It had renewal clauses, it had all the things in a supply agreement that you'd want it to have. So she thought, great, she signed the agreement, they signed the agreement, she came back to New Zealand and she worked very, very hard to build this business up. She went round to all the beauticians, she went round to hairdressers, she put her own stall in the local trade fairs, and she set up a supply line for her product. Very, very quickly, she signed lots of customers. She had about 250 customers nationwide, all buying her product. So things were going incredibly well. She had the exclusive rights to the product here in New Zealand. Now look, I'm deliberately not mentioning the name of the product. It's still in the market. It's a very well-known product. Don't think it's fair to mention the name of product, so that's why I'm not doing it. But she had a very successful business. She built it up over 5 or 6 years. She had a dozen people working for her. She had a multi-million-dollar turnover, and the business was going extraordinarily well. The supply agreement she had gave her exclusive rights, as I said, so when other people from New Zealand went to that company in Europe and said, hey, I want to import your product, they went, no, we've got exclusive rights with Alex. Go and see Alex. She's the lady that's handling it all. She's your girl. Talk to her. So things went well. That contract was renewed more than once, so the business was rolling, the business was growing. So what happened to go wrong? How did it all go wrong? Well, as things do, time changes, people move on, people change. Now Alex, as I said, she built a great business, but she met a guy, they got married, they wanted to start a family, and as things happen when you want to start a family, Alex got pregnant. And she decided she wanted to devote time to her family. She wanted more than one child. That's fine too. So something had to give in her life, and the business was time for that to go. Time for that to sell, pass it on to a new owner. So she called me in as the broker and said, can you sell the business? Had a look at it. It was a great business. Of course I can sell it. It was very profitable. It had a good supply agreement. It had great customers. The product was very well respected in the marketplace. So I thought it was going to be an easy sell to get her very good price for the business. And that proved to be the case. It was. We started our marketing. We got lots and lots of buyers looking at it. Lots of people wanted to buy it. And of course, the simple question was, is this supply agreement transferable? Now, we had a look at the supply agreement. We had a look at the terms and conditions in the supply agreement. And yes, it was transferable. That's not a problem. All we needed was approval from the supplier in Europe to transfer the supply agreement. Again, very standard clause, normal stuff that we would see. Now, we looked at the buyer. The buyer put together a business plan, a promo package, and we sent it over to the supplier in Europe. They approved the buyer. Everything was going swimmingly. So we thought we had the sale done. So what went wrong? How did the supply agreement cost Alex the sale of her business? Well, buried in the fine print of that supply agreement was a little clause that we didn't pick up at the time, or we did kind of pick it up, but we didn't really get the deep meaning of it. And that clause basically said that when the supply agreement was transferred, the company who was supplying the product had the rights to terminate the agreement without any cause, without reason, and they didn't have to give a reason. So it was a simple termination clause. You do see it a lot in these agreements, but it virtually never happens, or I hadn't heard it happening up until now. But the supplier decided they wanted to terminate the agreement based on this clause. But why? So why would the suppliers in Europe want to terminate the agreement to supply? Now, just recap, it was a successful business. It had a multi-million-dollar turnover. It was leading the market in this country in that product. We had a buyer. The buyer was approved. The buyer was actually a very good buyer. They were within the industry. They knew the product. They knew the industry well, so they were a very good buyer. They were well funded. But still, the supplier wanted to terminate the agreement. Why would they do that? We couldn't figure it out. And eventually I said to Alex, well, maybe we should ask them. What's behind this? What can we do to make them change their mind? Or is there anything we can do to make them change their mind? And this is what they came back to Alex and said. So they said to Alex, no problem at all. We love what you've done with the product. We love what you've done with the business. You've created a huge market in the country for the product. And we really appreciate that. You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you've done everything right. And that's why we want to terminate the agreement. Well, that made as much sense as a politician does when they're trying to get re-elected. I mean, you did nothing wrong. You built a great market, but we want to terminate the agreement. What is going on there? Well, it was simple, and it was something that neither Alex or I thought of. The lawyers didn't think of. In fact, nobody thought of it. Simple reason was this. So they came back to Alex and they said, look, you've done a great job. You've built a great brand. You've built a great reputation. You've got a great number of customers. In fact, the brand is doing extremely well in your country. In fact, it's doing so well in your country and the revenue is so high that we think it's time for us to open a branch office, a subsidiary company in New Zealand. So we're going to do that, which means obviously we can't supply you or your company anymore. We're going to do all the supply from now on. Well, as you can imagine, Alex was devastated. So were the buyers. They thought it was a great business. They were really keen to buy it. I wasn't too impressed either. I put a lot of work into the sale and it didn't happen. So that's the lesson about supply agreements. You've got to be very, very careful with supply agreements and don't rely on a single supply agreement to build a business, and certainly don't rely on a single supply agreement when you buy a business. Thinking about it from the buyer's point of view, well, they were actually quite lucky. There was about 18 months to go on the supply agreement. What had happened if they'd paid Alex a whole lot of money for this business, and 18 months turned around to the company in Europe and said, hey guys, we want to renew the supply agreement. And they turned around and said, no, we're going to open in the country, which they were very much entitled to do. So it's very much a lesson in how not to go about handling supply agreements. Something that no one really talks about, and it's certainly a hard learnt lesson for Alex. Now, in case you're wondering, Alex had the baby. In fact, she had 2 babies over a couple of years. I was talking to her not so long ago, which reminded me of this story. She started another business up, an online business, similar sort of things. This time she's learned her lesson. She has supply agreements from 4 different companies, and she's spreading her risk across those 4 companies. So not one of those 4 companies is dominant within her business. The way she looks at it, she'll run the business again for another probably 5, 6, 7 years, build it up, and we'll sell it for her at that time. But this time she can risk losing one of those supply companies, one of those companies, because she has another 3. So that's what you need to do when it comes to supply agreements. Not pretty story, but a true story, so beware of supply agreements. Well, if supply agreements give you the creeps, what about the employee, the staff member who held a business sale to ransom for $100,000? That's right. They held the business for ransom for $100,000 to get the business sold. How can that be? Have a look at that video up there. I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.